Good evening, I'm Bea Cupin, and this is In the Running, Rappler's special coverage of the first day of campaigns for national candidates for the 2022 elections. We have reporters on the field and reporters, researchers, and editors online to bring you context, analysis, fact checks, and updates as the 2022 candidates officially kick off their campaigns. At 4 p.m., former Senator Bongbong Marcos Jr. and Sara Duterte launched their campaign at the Philippine Arena in Bulacan. 5 p.m., Senators Ping Lacson and Tito Soto launched their campaign in Cavite. At around 5:30 p.m., Manila Mayor Isko Moreno and running mate Willie Ong launched their campaign in Manila. At around 6 p.m., Senator Manny Pacquiao and running mate Lito Atienza launched their campaign at General Santos City. At around 6 p.m., Vice President Leni Robredo and running mate Senator Kiko Pangilinan launched their campaign in Naga City. And also at around 6 p.m., Labor leader Calyodi de Guzman and running mate Walden Bello launched their campaign at the Bantayog ng mga Bayani in Quezon City. A lot of things going on. And joining me today as analysts, editor-at-large Marites Vitug, resident economist JC Punong Bayan, and Rappler's reporter for Foreign Affairs and Pandemic Response, Sofia Toma Cruz. Thank you for joining us. We'll try to make sense of what happened and what is happening today as the campaigns kick off. Joining us first is Lian Buwan, who is covering Bongbong Marcos Jr.'s launch. Oh, hello Marites, hello Sophia, hello JC. And we are joined by Lian Buwan. Kung sila may unit team, meron din kaming unit team. Lian covers Bongbong Marcos Jr. while I cover Sara Duterte, who's running for Vice President. Lian, first, tell us about Marcos Jr.'s launch in Bulacan. What was it like?
Alam mo, Bea, if I can describe it in one word, I would use the word chilling. And that goes for both the supporters and the critics of Marcos. For supporters, it's chilling because kitang-kita nila na malakas sila. They came from all over the country. We talked to people from Lanao del Norte, from Bicol, the province mates of VP Robredo, from Metro Manila. Kitang-kita mo na malakas sila. Chilling also for the critics of Ferdinand Marcos and their family and martial law because nag-aamba yung pagbalik ng isa na namang Marcos sa Malacanang and they are scared to death na magbabalik yung sinasabi nilang corruption, abuses, cronyism. But you know, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., the son, will do everything in this campaign not to go back to that narrative. His speech lasted almost 20 minutes. Sa sobrang gusto niyang maging feel-good at positive ng kanyang campaign, walang plataforma o planong nabanggit. The most he has gone to describing or talking about his plan ay yung sinabi niyang kapag nagkaisa na daw ang mga Pilipino, baka sakaling lahat ng Pilipino makuha na nila yung kanilang mga trabaho, mapakain na nila yung kanilang mga anak. So ganun. So it's a feel-good, positive campaign. It was in full display. And again, just to circle back to my point is, it's chilling. The Bagong Lipunan played in modern rendition at nakisayaw ang mga tao. For some people, this would trigger anxieties of martial law. Pero pagkatapos ng Bagong Lipunan, here comes Tony Gonzaga proclaiming tapos na ang laban. And hearing that, I think those who oppose a Marcos presidency, hearing that, they feel the chill for sure.
Lian, parang to add to what you were saying, no? Parang ang intense ng yung draw to nostalgia ni Marcos at ni Marcos Jr. at ni Duterte. Well, Marcos Jr. specifically, right? Can you tell us a little more about that? Is this something that he has been doing since he announced that he'd be running for president?
He has, the campaign has deployed a very strategic and clever way of messaging. In one breath, they would say that ang legasiya ng Marcos ang kanyang tatay, ang isa sa mga edge ng Marcos campaign. Pero kapag napunta naman sa discussion, yung abuses and corruption during martial law, sasabihin niya the sins of the father are not the sins of the son. So you don't know kung ano ba talaga yung messaging na gusto nilang tahakin. But you know, in this campaign, the supporters I've met, the people I've encountered, they do not care. simple ang kanilang pagtingin sa mga bagay-bagay. They do not have to complicate their mentality, their mindsets. Para sa kanila, idol nila ang kanyang tatay, sinabi yun ng kanilang nanay at tatay, sinabi ng kanilang lolo at lola. Simple, gusto ko si Marcos. And if you ask them why, if you ask them for their achievements, they do not care. They just like Marcos, and that's how simple and effective the campaign has been.
Let's welcome back Marites, JC, and Sophia. Let's unpack nga itong mga images, itong visuals, itong music na ginagamit natin na narinig natin kanina sa launch ng ng campaign ni Marcos Jr. at Duterte. Marites, how did it feel to see all these images?
Yes.
That harken back to martial law.
Yeah. As I was telling you offline earlier, that I seem to be the, shall I say, oldest in this group, and I was I was flooded with memories of martial law, with the music that they played, which they, as you called it, it's a remix of Bagong Lipunan, plus
Yeah.
Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s shirt jack, exactly what his father used to wear during the Marcos years. And then I wrote down here also the apart and the message of unity. Very simple, as Lian said. Wala. He just used the message of unity to get together everyone. But I just like to remind our viewers that there's so much at stake in this election. At stake is the future of our democracy. Let's remember na 6 years na tayo kay Duterte na nag-decline yung ating democracy, nag-decline yung ating transparency. Nagkaroon tayo ng ombudsman na pinipigilan yung pag-release ng SALN. So let's remember na yung context ngayon is the decline of the democracy. Yet, as we saw tonight in the rally, in the proclamation rally of the UNI team, na some of them pitched for continuity. So nagkaroon ako na apprehension na if they pitch for continuity, then it is this kind of lack of transparency, lack of accountability na baka makita natin in the next 6 years if Marcos Jr. wins.
Kumbaga continuity, pero continuity of what exactly are they promising? Sophia, we talk about nostalgia, no? But this nostalgia for us is an imagined nostalgia because we weren't there to witness, the atrocities of martial law. We weren't there. Like what we know is from what we read, from what our elders have told us, from our own research. So, how do you view this? For example, just like listening to modern takes of the songs that were played during the Marcos era.
I think no, Lian said it best. It's chilling. So even for me, somebody born after the return of democracy, that's still the feeling that it evokes. And I say chilling because my background is that I've had my parents were involved in EDSA. My teachers were very much involved in EDSA, and so when I see the images, for example, of BBM and Sarah and their proclamation rally, and just how large it is in the context also of a pandemic, it's chilling to see what a return to or I think it's chilling to even try and grasp what the past might look like today, or a return to the past. And so you talk a lot about continuity, but then continuity in what direction, right? Sometimes it feels like we're going backward, and I think it's very chilling and anxiety inducing, as Marites said, to think about what that era might look like for us today. And it also reminds me, the question, I haven't answered this question, but the question that was going through my head watching BBM and Sarah is really going back to my own history lessons and the history lessons of other schools as well. To be honest, Bea, I don't know about you, but martial law wasn't an extensive topic discussed in my early education. I think it was only really college and high school where this was brought up a lot, and it's because of the teachers that I had. So you definitely can't say across the board that this is the situation for all people our age today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
chilling is really it.
Yeah, same for me. Like I only really deep dived into the experiences of people during martial law because of a teacher who specifically wanted us to research on our own personalities from Ateneo who were involved in movements against Ferdinand Marcos back then. JC, malaking part ng itong nostalgia, false nostalgia, fabricated nostalgia na ito, yung mga disinformation, misinformation about the economy during the Marcos era. How have you been perceiving this? Like, how are you taking all these yung mga propaganda, ito mga nilalabas nila to help create the mythos, kumbaga, of the Marcos
Mm.
years?
You know, Bea, back in 2016, I've been writing about this false nostalgia already nung tumatakbo si Bongbong Marcos as Vice President. Pero ano parang it snowballed into this moment na parang talagang culmination ito ng years of strategic disinformation about the economy during martial law and other aspects of martial law as well. Pero I also find this, Bea, as rather ironic and hypocritical, yung ganong klaseng false nostalgia, yung message na babangon muli. Kasi if you look at the data, yung economic crisis in the mid-1980s caused by the dictatorship is still the worst economic crisis in our history after World War II. Not even COVID was bad enough to topple that record. Kasi in 1984 and 1985, the economy as measured by GDP contracted by 14%. Samantalang nung 2020, wala pang 10% ang binagsak ng ekonomiya natin. Pero ayun parang despite that harrowing episode in our history, especially economic history, parang walang nakakaalala. And tulad nung sinasabi ni Sofia, parang, and you, Bea, parang ano din parang sa generation natin, parang recent lang yung ganitong klaseng realizations. Even in my case, wala akong masyadong naalala nung elementary or high school about this episode in our history. It's only in recent years na talagang nag-deep dive din ako on this. And to think na hindi nga siya magandang naituturo in our basic education system, talagang walang nakakaalala na masyado nito. And I think this works to the advantage of the Marcos camp very well.
Right. Lian, nabanggit mo nga kanina, di ba, yung overall vibe at yung overall energy na gustong i-project ni Marcos Jr. at ni Sara Duterte, and even their senatorial candidates was, unity, good vibes, wala tayong, to the extent of, hindi talaga they didn't really discuss their platforms. Ano nga ba ang plan, no, ni Marcos? Because, I mean, given the context that we know, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, what have they said so far?
Hirap na hirap ako, Bea, kapag tinatanong ako kung ano ba yung plataforma ng kandidatong kino-cover mo kasi he has not published a detailed and comprehensive platform. Hindi siya katulad ni, for example, Senator Manny Pacquiao, who some people may say napaka-mouthful ng 21-point roadmap, but at least there is a roadmap. So I had to search my email for their press releases para lang kalkalin yung kanyang mga nasabi. At una sinabi niya, he will boost agriculture. In what way, I don't know. He wants to make the Philippines a logistical hub para daw to improve the digital and technological infrastructure para mas marami na. He said in Corina Sanchez interview, he's talking to someone who could bring better internet here, yung para hindi na daw magtra-transmit sa Singapore, dito na daw sa Pilipinas para mabilis yung internet. So it had been like a game for me of looking out for what he says during media interviews kasi kung wala yun, I really don't know, and I think that's the reason of Ibon Foundation. Kung bakit nag-upload, kasi nag-compile sila ng economic plans sa mga kandidato and they left Marcos's space blank. And I can't blame them kasi hindi nga naman kasi accessible and readily available yung plans ni Marcos. But so far yon sa economic plans, he has this something called Jabs for Jobs. Which is, I think, a template of all presidential candidates. This is a pandemic election. Hindi mo pwedeng hindi isali ang pandemic sa iyong plataforma. But Yun pa lang so far actually, kailangan kong malinawan sa marami kasi ang malinaw pa lang sa'kin at this point is, okey siya sa abortion for rape and other severe cases and kakaibiganin niya ng mabuti ang China, so much so that he is prepared to set aside the 2016 Hague ruling that awarded us basically the West Philippine Sea, na atin ang West Philippine Sea. Yun yung klaro sa'kin so far.
Wait, Lian, I wanted to ask you though. I mean, you follow him closely. I'm curious how far you think that strategy can go in terms of just harping on just pushing unity, unity, unity. It's still early right now on the campaign trail. Do you think that's going to be an effective strategy all the way till May? Especially if you have other opponents as well who are actually giving you concrete plans to talk about.
It is an effective strategy. It has proven to be an effective strategy because he has 53, he's 53% the front runner by a mile. Kung viable strategy ba to, alam mo, ang makakasagot lang yan tayong mga journalists kasi tayo yung nasa unique position to shape and frame this debate, this agenda. And I said this in the last In the Running episode. That's why I think the last Jessica Soho interviews was pivotal because before that, I think a lot of media personalities have been treating Marcos with kid gloves. They adhere to his demands na, ito lang yung mga tanong, o wag nyo na akong i-interviewin. But push to that corner na sobrang backlash yung inabot niya sa pag-snob kay Jessica Soho. We have seen, he has said to a lot of interviews, he has said yes. So an interview with Corina Sanchez, the wife of Mar Rojas, diba? So the question of kaya ba niyang ipagpatuloy na hindi mag-discuss comprehensively ng kanyang plan, na hindi i-discuss ang abuses of martial law. That is for journalists to make sure that we have, as much as possible, the best framing of the election debates.
Yeah, Bea, can I just add just a short comment? Kasi in 2 interviews, consistent si Marcos Jr. nung tinanong siya, bakit ka nag-join ng politics pagbalik mo from exile in 1991, 1992? Consistent yan. Sinabi niya kay Corina at saka sa isa pang nag-interview. Una, sabi niya, for the survival of the family. Pangalawa, sabi niya, to protect the family. So, I think isipin din nating mga journalists and I think the voters na I think that's their driving force.
Yeah.
Kaya secondary na lang yung platform na
Yeah.
as we know, unti-unting nabubuo dahil lang sa kaka-research ni Lian tsaka yung ibang reporters and watching interviews. So yun lang, to just remember yung kanyang instinctive reply is to protect the family and for the survival of the family.
Thank you. Thank you, Lian. You have 90 days to make sure Marcos Jr. answers the difficult questions. Thank you, Lian. She covers Bongbong Marcos for Rappler. On the call next is Jairo Boledo, who is covering the campaign launch of Labor leader Calyodi de Guzman and his running mate Walden Bello at the Bantayog ng mga bayani in Quezon City. Jairo, hindi pa nakapag-speech si Calyodi, ano?
Yes, Bea. Kasi 8:30 pa yung scheduled niya na speech, no? So base dun sa program nila. So kanina, since 6 p.m. na nag-start yung program nila dito sa Bantayog ng mga bayani, ang narinig pa lang natin nagsasalita ay yung mga party list nominees nung Partido Lakas ng Masa party list. At the same time, yung mga senatoriables niya, si Luc Espiritu, si Roy Cabonegro, saka si David De Angelo. So sila pa lang yung mga naririnig natin dito sa Bantayog ng mga bayani, dito sa campaign launch nila.
Jairo, na-highlight mo nga sa curtain raiser mo, no, para sa kick-off ng kampanya ni Calyodi at saka ni Walden yung choice to hold it dyan sa Bantayog ng mga bayani. Bakit nga ba dyan yung kick-off ng campaign?
Yeah, last night we asked Professor Walden Bello, laban ng masa chairperson, and then yung running mate ni Leody de Guzman, kung bakit nila napili itong Bantayog ng mga bayani para pagdausan ng kanilang campaign rally. Sabi ni Professor Walden, gusto daw nila maging totoo doon sa kanilang words na anti-Marcos sila, at the same time nilalabanan nila yung Duterte-Marcos axis of evil. So ito kasi, for the information of our viewers, Bantayog ng mga bayani was built to honor the martyrs and the heroes of the martial law, especially during 1972 to 1980 something. So, dito talaga nila napili kasi
Diyan yung
kung
mga pangalan, di ba?
yeah, oo. Kung pupunta po kayo dito sa Bantayog ng mga Bayani, makikita nyo talaga yung wall. I think it's written in bronze or in metal. And then nakapangalan doon, nakaukit doon yung mga pangalan ng mga martial law, martyrs, and victims. So, kasi nung start pa lang ng campaign ni Leody de Guzman, nung start pa lang nung paglabas nila ng platforms, ay malinaw na isa sa mga platforms nila ay exhume ang dictator na si Marcos doon sa libingan ng mga bayani. Pagbayarin sila sa mga sala nila, gusto nilang i-prosecute palalo itong mga Marcoses. At ang pinakamatindi nilang gustong gawin ay kapag nanalo daw sila, any one of them, De Guzman o Bello, ay gusto nilang bawiin yung mga ill-gotten wealth from the Marcoses and use it for the infrastructure, for the economy, and for the agriculture, which are yung platforms nila Leody and ni Bello.
Jairo, numbers-wise, we're talking about the Pulse Asia, the most recent Pulse Asia survey noong December 2021. Calyodi isn't doing very well among the presidential candidates. Neither is Walden Bello. But have you spoken to them about their drive? Like, what motivates them to run? And then, ano yung projection din nila? Diba? It's gonna be 90 days lang, but it's gonna be a long 90 days, right? To build your numbers up or whatever. And eventually, diba, the goal, of course, is to win on May 9.
Yeah. Isa lang word yung masasabi ko para doon sa campaign nila, optimistic. So, hindi sila naubusan ng pag-asa kasi I talked to their campaign manager a while ago, Partido Lakas ng Masa Chair, Sani Melencio, and then sabi nila, tinanong ko about their machinery kasi wala silang pera as compared to other presidential aspirants. Hindi ganun kalaki yung net worth ni Bello and De Guzman combined. So, sabi nila, umaasa daw sila sa tulong ng kanilang mga members, no? Tumatanggap naman daw sila ng donations from donors, pero I think it's not enough kasi hina-highlight nila na ayaw nilang tumanggap ng mga donations from the evil capitalist or yung mga kapitalista na nangaabuso daw sa karapatan ng mga manggagawa. Isa pa sa mga challenges for them is the machinery itself. Sabi nila, yung mga machinery daw ng mga kalaban nila ay driven ng pera. Pero yung sa kanila daw ay driven ng mga movement, mga tao na minomobilize nila. So I think this is my second time covering the elections, but this is my first time covering the presidential elections. And ito yung nakikita ko, mahihirapan talaga sila na humabol. Lalo na 0.004% lang yung voting preference ni Leody de Guzman. Actually, pang 7 siya, no? He's behind Parlade, Lieutenant General Parlade. But Parlade is out of the race because hindi naman siya pinayagan ng COMELEC na makatakbo. So, Leody is technically the 6th place na ngayon. So, I think marami pa yung assignment na kailangan nilang gawan and they have to improve their image, especially sa mga non-workers, mga non-labor unionists na kailangan nila ma-infiltrate itong mga layers na to para gumanda yung numbers nila in the coming days. Especially na may 90 days na lang sila to improve their numbers.
Kumbaga, no, adding to their base, kasi ito captured base na nila yung labor groups and their allies. Marites, you wanted to ask something?
Yes. Jairo, matagal na yatang pinag-uusapan nila Walden at Leo dito, ano? Pero bakit hindi pa sila mag-unite with the rest of the opposition? Mag-unite na yung Makabayan Bloc with Lenny. Bakit daw? Bakit ayaw nilang sumama?
I think it's still a mystery for everyone, especially that we know that there's a labor faction regardless of the leaning, regardless if sok them yan or not them. But one thing is very clear. Leody really wants to run. Kasi in last year, before the filing of candidacy, nag-usap ito mga labor faction nito. Our sources told us na nag-usap ito mga labor factions na to para mapagkasundoan kung sino yung iisang presidential ball na susuportahan nila. And most of these labor factions, especially the KMU faction, itong faction nila sa Matula, they agreed that they will support Lenny Robredo. But they also told us, itong faction na ito, na nagulat sila na nag-file si Leody de Guzman October 8 ng kanyang candidacy for president. As in, nagulat sila. So, no one knows except this, except Leody de Guzman's campaign team. Pero we talked to them and sabi nila, ay, gusto talaga nilang pagbabago kasi they don't believe na itong mga presidential balls, itong mga meron tayo ngayong presidential candidates, ay susuportahan yung mga platforms nila, susuportahan yung anti-contractualization, yung regularization ng mga workers. So they believe na the only way, their only shot para matupad itong mga kanilang mga adikain ay magkaroon sila ng sarili nila, yung matatawag nilang sarili nilang presidential or presidential candidate. So ito yung rationale behind Alyode running for the top post.
Tracy, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to add na yung camp ni Calyode at Walden Bello ang isa sa maingay pagdating dun sa pag-recover ng ill-gotten wealth ng mga Marcoses. And I think this is an issue na kailangan pang ma-hammer in the coming months, ano. Kasi ang mga estimate ngayon na meron pang 126 billion pesos ng ill-gotten wealth na hinahabol yung PCGG, and at the same time 204 billion dun sa unpaid estate tax liabilities ng mga Marcos, and si Marcos Jr. nga yung administrator ng Marcos Estate. At for the longest time, hindi nila binabayaran yung ganito. So ipag-i-add mo yun, ay halos sa 330 billion pesos ang hindi binabayaran ng mga Marcos na obligasyon nila sa gobyerno ng Pilipinas. To put that into perspective, halos kasing laki yun nung karagdagang internal revenue allotment na kailangan natin to fund yung implementation ng Mandanas ruling starting this year. So I think this should be a larger issue, pero kung mag-work ba yung narrative na habulin natin yung ill-gotten wealth ng mga Marcoses, etc., to boost the campaigns of any campaign of any candidate, I think that remains to be seen.
Yung interesting na contrast doon, JC, no? Habang ito yung parang isa sa mga key promises ng campaign ni Calyode, ito naman si Marcos Jr., nostalgia, yung parang corner ng kanyang kampanya. So parang ang ironic na sabay ito lumalabas ngayon. Although when you look at the numbers, it's Marcos Jr. who's doing much better, in fact leading the race. Banggit tayo ng banggit kay Marcos Jr., sorry, pero kung si Marcos Jr. nga hindi medyo malinaw yung how to achieve his lofty dreams for the Philippines, kay Calyode medyo sobrang linaw naman yung how niya. Siguro yung mas finer details na hindi pa masyado. Ano nga ba yung proposals, Jairo, ni Calyode in funding yung mga campaign promises niya?
Oo. Basically, yung number one source ng funds ni Calyode for his campaign promises, number one, the recovery of ill-gotten wealth of the Marcoses. And the number two is yung taxing the rich or yung wealth tax na tinatawag. After the KBP Presidential Forum, na pinag-usapan dito sa Twitter, pinag-usapan ito kahit saan. Kasi gusto ni Calyode at ni Walden Bello na i-tax yung mga 250 na pinakamayayamang pamilya sa buong bansa ng one-time 20% ng kanilang yaman. So gusto nilang dito kunin yung mga projects nila, projects para i-fund yung mga projects nila. So ito yung main reason nila kung bakit gigil na gigil sila talaga na maningil lang tax for their campaign promises. I think JC has a good take about this.
Yes, JC, I wanted to add to that.
Yes, well, as I mentioned sa last episode natin, yung wealth tax has been met with mixed success sa ibang bansa. And yung political economy is a reality na yung Kongreso ba, meron ba silang incentive to pass such a law? I think right now medyo malabo.
Bea, just want a short addendum lang na because you talked about the irony. The other irony is that for the family that amassed so much wealth, JC put the figures yung hindi pa nare-reclaim na wealth, for this family na ang daming nakuha sa bansa, ayaw magbayad ng estate tax. So isa pang irony yan na nilagay ko lang ito sa ating discussion.
Probably Lian can unpack that later when she gives a recap of Marcos Jr.'s campaign thus far. Thank you, Jairo Boleto, live from Quezon City, for a more complete update sa Calyode campaign, kasi hindi pa nga nag-speech si Calyode. Abangan nyo na lang po ang recap ni Jairo mamaya. Meantime, on the call is Mara Cepeda, who is covering Leni Robredo's launch in Naga City. Hello, Mara. Tell us about the Vice President and her running mate, Senator Kiko Pangilinan. Kaninang umaga ka pa sumusunod sa caravans at campaigns nila. Kamusta naman?
Hello, Bea. It's really such a hectic day for the Robredo Pangilinan tandem and their senatorial slate. Pero ngayong gabi, nag-end ito very emotional yung itong naging proclamation rally ni Vice President Leni Robredo. And we expected this because Naga City is her home, and she opened her speech by saying na dito siya lumaki, dito niya na-meet ang kanyang love of her life, si Sec Jessie Robredo, long-time Naga City Mayor. Kilala para sa Chinelas leadership na siya rin paniniwala ni Leni Robredo at ngayon ay kanyang pinapromise kung siya ay maging susunod na Pangulo ng Pilipinas. I say it's emotional kasi very comfortable si VP Leni dito and she speaks to Nagaweños with with the familiarity of an old friend. Kilala niya yung crowd na ito. Nung nagsasalita siya, they are at rapt attention. And I think one of the key messages of her speech this evening, ay tribute din kay Jessie Robredo dahil sabi niya sa gobyerno nila ni Robredo na tapat, malinis, kasama ang maliliit, kasama ang bawat mamamayan, kasama ang mga nasa laylayan, susuotan natin ang tsinelas ang gobyerno at patatawirin sa mga pilapil papunta sa iyo. Sa ating pamamahala, laylayan ang magiging bagong sentro. And I believe this message is really what sets Leni Robredo apart. Siya lang yung may ganitong messaging na pagdating sa tsinelas leadership at pag-i-involve sa ordinaryong Pilipino sa gobyerno at policy making.
Parang it's the imagery of the grassroots talaga, Mara, no? Mara, sa 2022 ngayon, si Vice President Leni Robredo is beginning where it all started nga, Naga City. You've covered the office of the Vice President for several years now. Can you walk us through how Robredo has changed or has not since winning in 2016?
Ikaw, Bea, alam na alam mo din to, ikaw yung nag-cover kay VP Leni nung kanyang very reluctant candidacy for the vice presidency. Ako pumasok na ako dito sa Leni Robredo coverage. Politiko na siya sa national level. Pero alam mo, ang napansin ko sa kanya, napakatindi ng growth niya. Yung kanyang pagiging decisive, yung kanyang paghahanap kung sino ba siya bilang isang leader. And I think nanggagaling din yun kasi precisely dun sa mga criticism sa kanya na dahil babae lang siya, mahina siya. But Leni Robredo has proven time and time again that she is not. She is probably, one of the most qualified public servants that we have out there. At titingnan lang natin dito sa Office of the Vice President, mababa talaga ang kanilang annual budget dahil ang OVP naman kasi ay, spare tire office siya. But Leni Robredo, yung kanyang experience sa NGO, sa saligan, pagiging alternative lawyer para sa mga hirap. Dinala niya yun sa OVP, nilaunch niya ang kanyang Angat Buhay anti-poverty program at nagawa din na ng paraan na tumulong yung opisina kahit kakaunti yung budget at mas lalong na-highlight ito nung nagkaroon ng pandemya. Pero ang isa pang maganda kay VP Leni Robredo ay hindi niya sinasarili yung credit. Lagi niyang sinasabi na kaya lang nagiging posible lahat ng mga proyekto na ito dahil dahil sa kooperasyon ng mga private sector sa kanya, kooperasyon ng iba't ibang volunteers. Pero she always emphasizes na nagtatrust ang mga tao na tumulong sa gobyerno kung sila ay tapat. And one of the efforts talaga ng OVP ay maging transparent sa kanilang transactions at proof dito yung kanilang high rating lagi sa COA at yung kanilang ISO certification. So ordinary yung tao, parang they all sound very, very technical eh. Pero para sa isang government office, malaking bagay ito kay VP Leni Robredo because these are indicators that her push for clean and transparent governance is already being done in the OVP. And if she becomes president, she's promising to do just that as well.
Sophia.
Yeah, I want to point out lang something about what Mara said. I think it's interesting that she brings up the issue of trust because, very recently, in terms of the pandemic now, this is really going to be one of the biggest challenges, if not the biggest challenge, that any Duterte successor will face come 2022 when they enter Malacanang. And Mara talks a lot about trust, and just recently, there was a study that scientists all over the world did to try to think about what accounted for different levels of performance of countries when it came to responding to the pandemic, and they really accounted for everything. We think about hospital capacity, number of hospital beds, things like smoking, obesity, and the population. But the one thing that really stood out and that made a difference in how many people got infected in a certain country was the level of trust that they had in the government and the level of trust that they had in their fellow citizens. And I kind of wanted to ask Mara more about this. I'm curious who VP Lenny is consulting for her pandemic response plans, and what will make Lenny's response as the vice president different from her response as president if she is elected in come May 2022, or should we just do more of the same on a larger scale?
VP Lenny Robredo likes to consult, and it's yung kanyang mga polisiya, hindi niya yan nilalabas, hindi niya yan gagawin, hindi niya ito finalize, hindi niya kinonsult yung mga experts para sa kanyang pandemic response plan. Siyempre, yung pinakasikat na mga kinonsult niya para dito ay dalawa sa ating former DOH chiefs na very respected and the public health community, si Dr. Dairit at si Dr. Esperanza Cabral. At nung kanyang ni-reveal yung kanyang pandemic response plans, katabi niya itong dalawang respected public health experts sa tabi. Pero hindi lang sila yung kinonsult ni VP Lenny. She also consulted to a lot of other public health experts, mga doktor, mga different medical and public health associations. They understand yung pandemic response, hindi lang kasi yung health very strict, very comprehensive mag-isip si VP Lenny and very strategic. She also consulted with economists, the business sector, dahil yung pagbangon sa pandemya, kasama na din dito yung pagbangon ng tao, pagkuha ng kanilang mga trabaho. And so, this is something that, she will not always reveal who she consulted, but makikita naman kung kaano, dun sa detalye na kanyang mga plano na ito ay nanggaling sa mga eksperto.
Yes, Mara, I wanted to ask you a question, kasi si VP Lenny, as you mentioned, is very quite competent. Yung mga plano have been laid down. Pero ano kaya yung strategy, Mara, nung camp ni VP Lenny in order to reach out to people? Paano niya ibababa sa masa yung ganong klaseng mensahe? You mentioned na naging emotional yung kick-off to her campaign, pero do you think they'll bank more on that, yung emotions, rather than yung data or yung mga specific plans?
It would have to be a combination of both dahil if it will just be against also the principle of Lenny Robredo kung puro appeal to emotion lang naman pero hindi siya based on any sound policy. So, ang challenge talaga for the Lenny Robredo campaign is to make sure that her message trickles down kay Aling Bebang at kay Mang Juan sa kanto. At key sa messaging ni VP Lenny ay yung mga kakampaign, yung mga volunteers niya. I know that there is a mechanism within the campaign that they've set up. They've spent the first 4 months since she announced her candidacy to really organize and parang hold these people's council in every sector, in every city, to make it easier for the official campaign team to coordinate with the volunteer groups and to give them a messaging na okay, ito yung issue, ito yung platform for the day na gusto nating i-highlight on social media, on the ground. Parang merong guidance from the official campaign team kasi bababa sa mga parang lieutenants ba nila among the different volunteer groups, and syempre may mga organizations din ang official campaign team kasi yun ibababa nila. Syempre we will see if this is going to reach the target market na ordinary Filipinos kung eventually VP Lenny's numbers will increase and in the next couple of survey numbers. But there is a system in place, but the next couple of weeks will test if that system will actually work.
Mara, 6 years of being vice president also means you have 6 years to more or less scrutinize who she is as a person, who she is as a leader. What would you say is Lenny Robredo's biggest weakness as a leader?
Alam mo, tingin ko yung biggest weakness niya, yung hindi siya typical traditional politician eh. Yun din kasi yung rason kung bakit late siya tumakbo, late siya nag-decide na tumakbo. And that's the reason why people are saying daming criticisms about her campaign, that it's too slow. She doesn't have a central messaging until gobyernong tapat angat buhay sa lahat in 2022. And I've written about this before. The fact that Lenny Robredo doesn't want to play the dirty game of politics can be considered her weakness kasi in terms of being practical and strategic about running this campaign, talagang nanguna na yung iba niyang mga kalaban who spent years, months to prepare for this campaign. Pero yun kasi yung kakaiba for Lenny Robredo, ayaw niya ng maduming politika. And that would probably mean the team adjusting so much because you have to navigate a very dirty kind of culture. And they're hoping their very best na itong change that VP Lenny Robredo is hoping to introduce to the people na nanggagaling sa kanila yung mensahe, nanggagaling sa kanila yung efforts to really campaign for VP Lenny Robredo will hopefully propel her to the presidency. Pero yun, yung kanyang pagiging hindi trapo ay both boon and bane to the Lenny Robredo bid for the presidency. But that, playing the dirty game of politics never really the way of Lenny Robredo.
Mara kasi 'di ba parang for most politicians the first day of your campaign it's not the 90 days pero it's the first day after election day dapat simula ka na pag-prepare sa sunod na election day. Speaking of campaign symbols and campaign messaging kahapon for certain social media circles, puno ng pink at puno ng rosas yung social media feeds ng mga tao. Bakit rosas? Saan ba to galing? Is there a rationale behind this?
Sabi ni VP Lenny, yung kulay rosas ang kulay ng bukas. Yun yung that's the aspiration that she wants for the Philippines, and it symbolizes the malinis, matino at mahusay na gobyerno that Robredo is promising the Filipino people if she wins the presidency. Rosas siya dahil rooted din siya dun sa pink color na organically pinili ng mga supporters niya nung siya ay nag-declare ng kanyang kandidatura sa pagkapangulo. Originally talaga, ang piniling kulay ni VP Lenny Robredo ay blue. And we know that blue yung pinili kasi medyo neutral ito Neutral color siya. And it coincides with her decision to run as an independent candidate. Pero nung nakita niya na nag-announce siya, everybody supported her was wearing pink. And so she adopted it. And kaya rin pinili nila yung rosas. It also consistent with the message of VP Lenny na para ma-reach nila yung iba't ibang sectors, iba't ibang base ng mga voters that are not necessarily sold to an idea of a Lenny Robredo presidency yet or are supporting a different candidate altogether. Yung message, yung kulay rosas ay message din na kailangan wag antagonistic, wag nyo silang aawayin, wag magiging bastos, but pakinggan and engage in a manner that hopefully will convince them to at least consider her for the presidency.
My last question from me. You've been with the Robredo campaign the whole day. Can you walk us quickly through what happened, not just in Naga, but in the other cities and towns that you visited earlier today?
Yung araw na to, feeling ko glimpse siya talaga kung gaano ka-busy si VP Lenny in the next 90 days. I describe her as indefatigable kasi yung una niyang trip sa Lupi, which is about malayo sa mga 3 hours away from Naga City. Tapos pumunta siya sa Libmanan, and then she also went to Tigoan, nag-Iriga City pa siya bago siya pumunta dito sa Naga City. So wala talagang pahinga si VP Lenny Robredo. So makita mo din yung effort. And sinisiksik niya lahat ng pwede niyang puntahan kasi kailangan may reach people from faraway areas as possible. Ang napansin ko, one of the changes that they had to do in the usual political sortie campaign setup is dun sa mga different stops, nag-adopt sila ng parang stop and go style. Na usually kasi parang ganito yung traditional setup sa likod ko, yung may stage, tapos aakit lahat ng kandidato, tapos yung mga tao na nakakumpol, diba? So, ginawa nila dun sa town is parang stop and go lang. Parang habang nakikita yung mga tao, may nakaset up na stage, so may magpapazumba muna para ma-entertain yung mga tao, may kakantang artista, backing VP Lenny. Pag dumating na yung mga senatorial bets, pa isa-isa, nakasakay sila sa sasakyan, bibigay sa kanila yung mic, they have 3 to 5 minutes or more to speak, tapos alis na sila, susunod naman. So parang hindi masyadong magtatagal yung crowd doon. Siyempre, ang downside to that is it's really, really logistically very difficult to control the crowd. Lalo na kung na-excite sila na nandyan si poging senatorial candidate A or si very sikat candidate B. I mean, there are in fairness naman sa mga kaalyado ni VP Lenny dito sa Camarines or sa mga towns and cities na pinuntahan niya. May reminders naman both the mayors and the hosts na mag-observe ng physical distancing pero not really medyo impossible to follow the guidelines na may social distancing. Dito pa lang sobrang daming dito, easily thousands yung umattend dito sa Plaza Quezon sa Naga City. Wala na, parang feeling ko pre-pandemic na, lalo na nung nagsasalita na yung mga kandidato, talagang dikit-dikit sila. Tapos nagpe-play na yung music. Parang very, very festive, very, very fun. But in the same time, medyo nakakatakot din dahil may pandemic pa rin ngayon. But we can see the efforts of the Robredo campaign team to try to make it as safe as possible. But practically speaking, it is going to be very hard.
Marites?
Yeah, hi Mara. I know that you've written about this, how Lenny can improve her numbers, but what is the main thing that she should work on to be able to catch up with the numbers of the front runner? I remember this also in 2016, she started at 1%, right? And then she came from behind and eventually won. So, ano ba if there was one big thing or single thing she had to do, what should it be?
She needs to counter the disinformation that has festered online and has, seeped into the minds of Filipinos. And I know it's something that you always hear repeatedly, but it's so big kasi 5 taon na ng paninira kay Lenny Robredo. And tipong parang dahil napapanood mo na siya lagi sa TikTok, sa Facebook, sa Twitter, parang na-mind conditioning na yung tao na mahina si Lenny Robredo dahil babae siya. Na kuda lang siya ng kuda, wala siyang nagawa. So the approach of the team now is to make sure that all the Filipinos that they can reach out to in the next 90 seconds, makita at makausap si Lenny Robredo dahil confident ang Robredo team na basta makausap sila, basta maka-interact nila si Lenny Robredo, magbabago yung isipan nila. And I think important din for VP Lenny and mas na bawasan yung mga nininitpick ng mga critics that fuels the perception that she is weak because she's a woman. Like yung kanyang tendency na mag-ulit ng mga salita or magsabi na para sa akin kasi part yun ng kanyang pag-iisip habang nagsasalita. Pero masyado kasi mataas yung standards ang na-offer VP Lenny Robredo. And so we've seen the effort of the Robredo team to really showcase, that she is decisive, she is strong, even in the manner of she's speaking. Actually, nag-work nga to her advantage yung mga debates or yung mga interviews na time kasi mas nababawasan yung mga mannerisms in terms of her speaking.
Thank you, Mara. She's live from Naga City. She's been covering VP Lenny Robredo since this morning. Day 1 pa lang yun ng 90 days of the campaign for national candidates. Now, speaking of the campaign during a pandemic, you want to unpack that later, so Sophia. You'll be talking about that. Specifically, now from Naga City, we move to Manila. Joining us is Pia Ranada, who is covering Isko Moreno's launch in the city of Manila. Pia, you've also been following Isko Moreno all day. Tell us about it.
There was never really any doubt that Manila would show up for Mayor Isko Moreno. So, nakita natin na he started his day praying at Tondo Church where he grew up in Tondo area. And then from there, nag-caravan siya all around the city. They didn't expect it to take so long. Akala nila parang morning lang yan. Pero hanggang 3 p.m. yung caravan kasi ang dami daw tao, like people who were present said like thousands really showed up on the streets. And we know Manila streets some of them are quite small. And so, nag-clog yung streets and it took them until 3 p.m. to finish the motorcade. Isko Moreno had to skip lunch because didn't expect it would take that long. So, dumiretso na sila sa Proclamation rally dito sa Kartilyo ng Katipunan. And this monument, which is behind us, the venue is behind us. And important for his mayorship kasi number one, this is one of the first monuments he cleaned up when he was mayor. Kasi if you remember, may natapakan pa siyang tae, may mga basura dito, nagalit siya. So, pinapunta niya dito yung mga city hall staff, tapos pina-hose down. And I guess naging symbol na rin siya of his decisive leadership and his dynamic leadership na, he'll come here, fix the problem right away. He won't wait for any more red tape to do the right thing. So I guess that's why he launched his campaign here. And he said also that parang this area is also a stone's throw away from City Hall where he has been in power for the last 3 years. Sabi nga niya, yung monument is the view of his office. So also very symbolic na he's launching it from where it all began, di ba? His political career really began in Manila City Hall where he was a councilor, three-time councilor, three-time vice mayor, and finally mayor. And hopefully, he's now hoping to be the president of the Philippines coming May elections.
Sophia?
One
I think Sophia has a question for Thea.
Yeah, I'm curious because you talk a lot about Mayor Esco's history, of course, in local government, and you also covered a candidate who jumped from the local scene to the national stage in 2016. I'm curious what you see are what sets Mayor Esco apart from then Mayor Duterte, and do you see similarities as well?
Definitely, there are differences. For one thing, Isko Moreno speaks in a more coherent way. If you notice, he's actually very good at projecting himself as a good communicator. Marami siyang good sound bites. Very catchy yung kanyang mga sinasabi and very fluent. It's actually very structured, his speeches. Like he will sometimes even enumerate what he wants to tell the public. It's very easy to understand his flow. Whereas si Duterte, if you remember, nagtatrail off siya. Minsan he doesn't finish his sentences. You don't know what he's talking about. You're confused what he means. He's often misunderstood. So that's very different. Si Isko Moreno is also often on time. I remember that Duterte would always be late for his events. And on top of that, he would wake up after lunchtime or around lunchtime. Whereas si Isko Moreno wakes up very early. He's actually a morning person. And lots of his staff nga complain that he would get up too early for them, or he's always doing something so early in the morning. So definitely there are differences. Pero yung similarities, definitely the populist rhetoric. He's always saying that he's an outsider, that he wants to change the political system because he's not a known figure, and he wants to change that. He also would pit himself na parang him against the world almost, like him against the elites, him against the rich and wealthy. And we know that Duterte often uses that divisive rhetoric as well, di ba? Yung oligarchs niya versus the people of the Philippines, the media are legitimate targets of assassination. Duterte does tend to be more violent in his language, but even if Isko may be a suaver version, a more calm version of Duterte, he still has some elements of pitting him and his allies against people he perceives as enemies. Syempre, because that kind of language, diba, is supposed to work to his favor. Parang it's supposed to drum up his base and make them feel like they're part of a movement. So definitely, siguro yun yung talagang similarities.
Marites?
Bea, I know you're very tired. It's been a long day. But I've been receiving these memes of posters of Isko and Sarah. What does Isko have to say about that? Is there really a serious move on the part of Sarah's followers or Isko's followers to, endorse them?
Yes. I asked Lito Banayo, Moreno's campaign manager, earlier, and he really flatly denied that they had anything officially to do with yung isa, di ba, Isko, Sara tandem. But, I talked to Duterte appointees, former and current. I talked to Duterte supporters, and there really is a movement, even if informal, that some just cannot stomach supporting Bongbong Marcos. But of course, as Duterte supporters, they would support Sara. So meron talagang isa movement. And in fact, we saw today, former Duterte Cabinet Secretary John Castriciones showed up at the rally, even spoke up praising Isko. And we know that Castriciones founded a major volunteer group that supported Duterte's 2016 presidential bid. And from what I gathered from people in the team of ISCO, they are MRRD MECC, that volunteer group, is backing Moreno, but backing Sara Duterte for vice president. So if you notice, si John Castriciones did not really speak about Willie Ong earlier. He just said, we declare support for Isko Moreno, but no mention of the running mate. So I guess you can already get a clue from that.
Right. For added context naman, because aside from covering Sara Duterte, I also cover PDP Laban, na walang presidential candidate, kaka-adopt lang nila kay Sara Duterte as their adopted vice presidential candidate. Nung kinukulit sila, sino ba yung presidential candidate? Kasi syempre, ruling party kayo, at least on paper, right? The president is their chairman. Ayaw nila mag-commit. Like they were asked, Bongbong Marcos, ayaw nila magsabi. Uh, Reporters tried very hard to squeeze it out of PDP Laban officials pero ayaw talaga nila magsalita kung sino ba yung pinupusuan nila as a presidential candidate. In fact, last night, midnight, just before midnight, they released an 11-point agenda from PDP Laban. Ironic, coming from a party without a presidential candidate of their own or a vice presidential candidate of their own. And I think kanina nag-release din sila ng press statement saying na they will support whoever adheres to that 11-point agenda. So for added context, and Mayor Sara Duterte has been very explicit na while she appreciates the support, her loyalty is with her running mate kasi syempre, di ba, that would be added tension or that would be tension within the Marcos Jr. and the Duterte tandem din, di ba, when there's this very loud and very public and very overt na movement no to support Isko Moreno and Sara Duterte. So I just wanted to add that in as insight from PDP Laban and Sara Duterte. JC, you wanted to ask something?
Yes, Pia, I just wanted to ask, just like President Duterte, Isko promises to scale up many of the things that he has done for Manila and to scale that up to the national level. And then indeed, he has a lot to show for dami mga projects in the past few years. Pero has he mentioned already how he plans to do that, how to scale up his programs to the national level? Or is this even a critique that they are concerned about at all?
Well, dun sa question on how he will fund all of those big promises, right? Like building schools and hospitals and increasing the budget for education and housing, etc. Isko says that number one, he will try to make government transactions more efficient and less prone to corruption. So I guess this is his way of earning more money by simply streamlining and taking away the money that you lose from corruption. Obviously, this is not a perfect solution because diba, how much money can you really get from that effort? And we know naman na given the scale of what he wants for the country, how does that really, like yung proportion ng gusto niyang gawin, is it really going to match up to that? So he hasn't really given any concrete, but things like joint exploration with China or any country, like gusto niyang itap yung ganong venture to possibly get more income for the Philippine government. Things like he wants to use the Mandanas ruling and the kind of income that LGUs will get from that. He wants to parang help LGUs find a good way to spend their additional budget so that it can translate to more regional hospitals or more schools or more programs for the people. So he has been giving details, but definitely hindi pa siya ganun ka-concrete, at least in my view. And I don't know what you think about that.
Sophia?
Yeah, can I ask? I mean, just taking up from what you mentioned right now, Nopia, you're talking about, concrete details he's given about how he's going to scale up those programs. And I think one area where he's really promising a lot of scaling up is when it comes to the pandemic. Mayor Isko is a unique candidate in the sense that perhaps apart from Sara Duterte, he's a local official who has also been on the front lines of responding to the pandemic, because right earlier on the Duterte government said it will be national government enabled, local government led their fight for their response to the pandemic. So I'm curious how you see if you see Mayor Isko's experience as a local official, is it bringing more concrete plans for the pandemic? Do you see that it's giving him an edge perhaps over his other candidates, or are you have you been satisfied with his pandemic proposals? Because you also closely cover Duterte.
Judging from the testimonials by the political allies he was able to attract to this event, I would say that his pandemic response has become a boon for his candidacy, because if you listen to the testimonials, they're all about actually his track record, and a lot of them were citing things like how he was able to construct the Luneta Field Hospital in less than 60 days, and how he was one of the first, if not the first, mayor or local government to order certain COVID-19 medicines. So that was really a big part of the rhetoric tonight, and I think that they are true. I mean, on some level, really, it is quite impressive, diba? Yung things that he's been able to do in a short amount of time. Things like yung mga medicines. When I asked DOH and other officials, other city mayors, if they were able to procure those medicines, they really say no. And it seems to me that on some level, it is true that Mayor Moreno has been able to get these medicines ahead of a lot of people. So impressive yun to a lot. And even, among my friends, people who were had relatives who were sick with COVID, they were saying na meron doon mga Viber groups where Manila City Hall staff, you could easily coordinate with them, and sa Manila pwede yan, free yan basta may prescription ka. So there is really like a sense that that Manila is kind of distinguishing itself on some level in certain aspects of the pandemic response, and he's really been able to use this to his advantage.
JC?
Yes, well, I just wanted to add that compared to the other presidential bets, I think si Isko yung may pinaka-malakas at pinaka-sound na stance when it comes to the Mandanas ruling kasi alam natin it will be implemented starting this year. And actually, Isko Moreno has been able to marshal funds already even if ngayon pa lang siya i-implement. Doon sa certification they got from the Department of Budget and Management that he supposedly used to build school buildings, hospitals, etc. So I think that's a strength of when it comes to Isko Moreno. So, yeah.
Yeah, may interesting insight from the latest Pulse Asia survey, at least the one released in December 2021, di ba? Isko is the top second choice. And in fact, parang based on a lot of pundits and even Pulse Asia itself, parang in the event of a disqualification of the leader of the survey, Isko might just benefit the most. What's the strategy for wooing the undecided? And did this speech earlier help in doing just that? Wooing the undecided, or kahit yung mga pumili na, parang pull them to his side?
Very interesting earlier, Bea, no? Si Isko Moreno listed down the things that make the other rivals competent. Like, he mentioned Lacson, Leody de Guzman, Pacquiao, and Robredo, but he did not mention any strength of BBM or Bongbong Marcos. So you can really tell that he's maybe, I don't know if he forgot him or it was deliberate, but definitely parang there's something there. And yung kanyang messaging earlier was really centered on the fact that two families or two political entities, the Marcos side and also the Aquino Liberal Party Robredo side, parang basically parang he grouped them together and said that these two families, they've been dominating our political life for decades, and dapat iba naman yun yung sinasabi niya. So he's definitely counting on that rhetoric na dumagoso naman, not naman another Marcos, another Aquino, another Robredo, so on and so forth. And definitely, there's a feeling in his team that it's not even just disqualification of Marcos that could bode well for Isko, but they're even saying that the fact that si Marcos has not been joining many debates, and on the ground now they're hearing that's really causing some Marcos supporters to reconsider their support for Marcos. That could go to Isko, who has been, in contrast, pretty actively joining these town halls, these interviews. So they're really counting on that. And yung kanyang retort talaga na let's end the elite politics, etc. I think that's what he's using to try to get votes not just from the Marcos camp but from the Robredo camp, because we know that those two politicians are ahead of him in the surveys.
Okay. Pia, we have a phone-in question from someone who's actually joining us much later in the program, no? How significant yung appearance ng Duterte officials now backing Isko? Siguro yung follow-up dito ay, is this foreshadowing of a possible Duterte endorsement? Is that even something that I know we expressed openness before?
Definitely, the presence of those Duterte officials and supporters is a big deal for the team. It's like they really counted on that. They were really happy about that. And you can tell that this is the fruit of the strategy of Isko Moreno when he began to court Duterte supporters by saying, that he welcomes the presidential endorsement, that he would not hand over the president to the ICC in case ma-convict siya of crimes against humanity. So definitely, nag-pay off yun in the sense that, hey, they showed up in my rally. They proclaimed strongly support for me, and so hindi na siya nag-iisa. And in a way that does not really you could really say that, you could argue that does not counter his anti-elitist rhetoric, because of all the anti-elitist politicians, anti-elitist rhetoric politicians we have, is Duterte, who's really been saying, diba, na down with the oligarchs. So he knows he can make a case that by joining with Duterte, he is not going against his
own messaging of being an outsider, trying to make a difference in Philippine politics.
Pia, you already mentioned kanina na in the 2016 elections, you covered a different mayor who was trying to enter national politics. Now, President Rodrigo Duterte, you've been covering him for the past 6 years. Where is he in all of this in the 2022 elections? Of course, Sara is running for vice president. She's been endorsed by his party. No presidential candidate yet. You've written about this for Rappler na, yung kung ano ba yung possible role ni President Duterte in the 2022 campaign. Can you expound on asan siya dito? Where is he now? And like, not literally, but where will he figure in the 2022 campaign?
There are two possibilities. One is that he will endorse someone at the latter part of the campaign season, or he will not endorse anyone ever, and he will just nitpick on whoever candidate gets his vote, and to be relevant during the campaign. So this doesn't mean it's not an either or thing. That right now he knows what to do. I think that this will depend really on the context of that point in time, right? When Duterte realizes, oh, I have this ace, my endorsement, should I use it? So it's really going to depend on how close the fight will be come May 2022 or April 2022. How big a margin will the front runner have against other candidates, and can Duterte trust that front runner to protect him or to be his ally? When he steps down from power, because we know that an overarching concern of Duterte, even if he doesn't say it outright recently, is that he needs the next president to be an ally, and he's actually nag-slip na siya before about this. Like sa isang PPP Laban meeting, or I think it was a pandemic meeting, he said na dapat yung next president kaibigan ko. So I think this is something he thinks about, and he is constantly reconsidering different options, weighing what to do, because he knows that he does have an ace and he will definitely use that.
Yeah. Pia, I'm also curious because you covered the 2016 campaign. How different is a kickoff during a pandemic to the kickoffs that we covered, oh my God, 6 years ago during the 2016 elections?
For one thing, itong campaign kickoff ni Isko Moreno was by invite only. So that's unheard of, right? Because usually what you want is kahit sino dyan, pumunta ka dito, show yourself,
correct,
and express support. But dito talaga, they issue tickets. And if you have no ticket, you can't enter. So that's one difference. Another thing is the things that we take for granted that politicians can do. Kissing, like yung beso-beso, yung handshake, etc., selfies. Ngayon, bawal na yun. And I'm really at a loss to figure out how COMELEC will enforce that, because earlier we were speaking to Lito Banaya, and sabi talaga niya na we can't debate with COMELEC anymore about those rules, but they have to understand in a campaign, how can you really stop supporters? And then it's also unfair naman to penalize the campaign team who, are also limited in manpower and can't naman be expected then to see everything, to have eyes everywhere. So we'll just have to see how that will go.
Thank you, Pia Ranada. It's been a very long day for you. Thank you for joining us. Next, we go to Rambo Talabong, who is covering Ping Lacson's launch in Imus, Cavite. Hello, Rambo. Tell us about Lacson and Senate President Tito Soto. Kamusta sila sa hometown ni Senator Lacson?
Hello, Bea. Hello dyan sa Rappler Studio, tsaka hello sa mga nanonood sa atin ngayon. Buong araw tayo sa Imus, Cavite, capital talaga ng Cavite. At napakahalaga nitong lugar na to para kay Senator Panfilo Lacson at saka kay Senate Senate run nila. Consistent silang pinakamataas nakakuha ng boto dito sa Cavite. Kaya malaki talaga to para sa kanila. At alam naman natin talagang Cavite ang second most vote-rich province sa Pilipinas. So this is really a big deal for them. And it's also a symbolic venue for them kasi dito nga it's a site of revolutions, and Senator Panfilo Lacson and Senate President Tito Soto is advocating for the end of corruption. Gusto nilang tapusin ito. At paulit-ulit itong mensaheng ito, Bea. Sinasabi nila nakakalabanin nilang korupsyon. At pati yung kanilang mga Senate candidates, sinasabi na masaya sila at kasama nila si Senator Ping Lacson at saka si Senator Ping Lacson at saka Senate President Tito Soto kasi talagang against sa corruption sila. Ang paulit-ulit nilang linya na sinasabi ay hindi ako korap kasi kasama ko si Lacson. Kung ako ay korap, hindi ako makakasama sa slate ni Panfilo Lacson. So meron silang ganong pagkakampante. At ang paulit-ulit na sinasabi nilang paglalarawan kay Senator Ping ay talagang siya ang karapat-dapat na kasunod na Pangulo ng Pilipinas. So meron ditong konting pag-amin na hindi ganoon kataas ang kanyang ratings ngayon. Maaaring ang kandidatong mukhang nananalo ngayon ay iba, pero sa palagay nila, sa kanilang paniniwala, ang karapat-dapat talagang maluklok na Pangulo sa 2022 ay si Senator Panfilo Lacson. Bea?
Rampo, si Senator Lacson at Senator Soto, no, parang yung image na gusto nilang i-portray or either successfully or unsuccessfully, depending on how you look at it, no, na very straight shooter sila, no-nonsense candidates. Paano yung how does this translate perhaps in the way they've campaigned and even in the priorities that they've listed down as presidential and vice presidential candidates?
Tama ang pagkakadescribe mo sa kanila, Bea. Straight shooters, as in straight to the point. Ito nga rin ang tanong natin kanina sa kanilang first press briefing as candidates for the 2022 elections. Tinanong ko sila, hindi ba nakakatanggal ng interes kung palagi kayong straight shooters? Kasi kung ang gusto ng mga botante minsan ay paligoy-ligoy, yung meron maganda sila napapakinggan, malalaki mga pangako, pero sila, they are insisting that they will not promise anything that they will not deliver. Ayaw nila mag-promise ng hindi pinag-aaralan at maaaring boring ito, maaaring hindi ito magandang pakinggan, maaaring mabobore tayo, pero sa kanila, straight to the point sila, sasabihin nila kung kaya nila o hindi, kung may budget o wala, at yun talaga ang kanilang branding na gusto na ipakita. Sinabi ko na, will this not compromise your campaign because it does not make you stand out so much? They countered me. Sabi nila, it makes us stand out because we are staying in this platform. Ang aming pinaglalaban ay plataforma at ang aming pagiging straight shooter. Compared to other candidates na maaaring mabulaklak ang kanilang pagsasalita, ang gusto ni Lacson at ni Soto, straight to the point, plataforma at ang kanilang dekadang karanasan sa gobyerno. Bea?
I think JC has a question.
Yes, Rambo, I just wanted to ask dun sa talking point ni Senator Lacson tungkol sa budget reform. He stands out among the presidential bets about on this, na siya lang nagbe-bring up ng ganong klaseng issue. Of course, we know that he has made a name for himself as a fiscalizer in the Senate. Pero how effective is that talking point kasi alam natin yung budget issues hindi masyadong popular in past elections, and I doubt that it will be popular in this coming election. So bakit may ganong nakalusot na talking point sa mga speeches and past interviews ni Senator Lacson?
Tama no, JC, magandang punto yan. That's a very big policy proposal of Senator Panfilo Lacson. Pero kung sa kampanya, as in buong araw, pinapanood natin si Senator Lacson, hindi niya nabanggit ito kahit isang beses ang pagiging fiscalizer, ang budget. So tamang binanggit mo na hindi ito ma-appeal, mahirap din ito ipaliwanag di ba JC? Kaya ang kanila talagang hine-headline ay ang korupsyon. Pero kung tatanungin mo sila, halimbawa sa press conference, kung tatanungin namin, may sagot naman sila. Hindi naman sa tinatago nila, pero sa palagay ko, alam din nila, naiintindihan din nila na itong pagiging fiscalizer, ang pagkakaroon ng budget at ipapamigay sa mga rehiyon ay hindi rin ma-appeal sa kanila. Itong talking point na ito, JC, itong sasabihin nila na ilalabas ang budget maayos, magandang distribution, ito yung makikinig mo lang kay Lacson at kay Soto kung kinakausap nila yung mga opisyal, yung mga hahawak ng pera. Pero dito sa botante na nandito, hindi nila pinag-usapan, JC.
Thank you.
Sophia?
No, speaking of that, Narambo, well, first of all, I want to point out something that's very different so far from your background. Walang tao. I think if I'm not mistaken, right, the speech ended, the proclamation rally ended around 30 minutes ago, and yet behind you, it's already so clear. And earlier on, Lacson mentioned that they want to stand out by showing discipline on the campaign. But I think also one way they're standing out is perhaps, again, comparing them to other candidates, they probably have the least hands-on experience when it comes to dealing with the pandemic. But they do have that view from the Senate as lawmakers. How are they making up for that lack of first-hand experience when it comes to responding to the pandemic, and what have they offered voters so far in terms of improving the situation we're in right now?
Tama, Sophia, no? Dahil nasa Senado sila, pwedeng sabihin na kulang daw sila sa on-the-ground experience. At itong kritisismo ito, Sophia, ay patama na nga ni presidential candidate Lenny Robredo weeks ago sa interview niya kay Boy Abonda, I believe. And they really did not take it lightly. Talagang ang sinasabi ni Senator Lacson at saka ni Senator Lacson, Senator Soto, ay meron silang karanasan. Kahit na hindi man ito pandemya, meron pa din silang ibang mga crisis na hinawakan nung sila ay nasa mababang posisyon pa. Kasi kung matatandaan natin, nagsimula din sa local government itong si Senate President Soto sa Quezon City. Tapos ito naman si Senator Lacson ay naging kadete at saka naging opisyal sa Metrocom ng martial law. Meron silang on-the-ground experience din dito at saka ang kanilang hina-highlight naman, Sofia, ay kahit na wala silang on-the-ground experience, kung perang pag-uusapan, kung korupsyon ang pag-uusapan sa healthcare, formally, nandyan sila. Kung meron silang tatanungin tungkol sa mga presyo ng healthcare goods, kung merong kritisismo sa Duterte administration na kailangang ilalabas naman nila ito, Sofia. Kaya ang kanilang pinapakita ay hindi lang sa meron silang experience, karanasan on the ground, meron silang eagle's eye view, bird's eye view kung anong nangyayari. At sa tingin nila, ito din talaga ang kanilang defining factor that will make them stand out.
Marites?
Hi, Rambo. On a light note, it's been a long day for you. On a light note, Ting Lacson and Tito Soto are the oldest, di ba, among the candidates. So, but it doesn't, hindi siya nagiging issue, no, age, which is good. So, has it ever come out as an issue during your coverage? Kasi sila yung dalawang seniors. Bawal nga daw, di ba, mag-attend ng rally yung seniors?
Exactly, Marites. That's such a good question. And hello to, and I know it's a long day, but it's really important. And ang nakakagulat o nakakatuwa sa tingin ko ay itong buong araw kasama natin sina Senators Lacson at saka Soto. So meron talaga silang energy para gawin ito. Nakaupo sila, nakikipagsayawan sila, nakikipag-appear sila. May energy talaga sila. At itong tanong na ito tungkol sa kanilang edad, lumabas na ito dati, pero yung pinakamagandang sagot siguro so far ay lumabas ngayon sa kanilang first press briefing kaninang hapon. Yun natin, hindi ba problema tong health? Kasi nga, vulnerable kayo sa COVID. Ang sabi ni Senator Soto, they're prepared physically, mentally. Naghanda na daw talaga sila dito. Tapos si Senator Lacson naman, meron siyang senior. Sabi niya, nagkaroon siya ng physical evaluation, health evaluation. At kung hindi ako nagkakamali, ang sabi daw, ang kanyang body age, so ang real age niya is 73. Pero ang body age daw niya is 51, if I'm not mistaken. So parang hindi pa siya nagre-retire sa PMA. Yung gusto niyang sabihin na meron talaga siyang energy para ipagpatuloy ang kampanya. At saka nakita din natin ang kanilang vigor dito sa campaign na ito, kanilang kalakasan, kasiglahan, kasi pumunta pa nga sila sa West Philippine Sea para magkaroon ng symbolic flag raising at pakikisama sa tropa natin, sa mga sundalo natin sa West Philippine Sea, at bumalik sila, hinarapan nila ang China. At ngayon, ang alam ko hindi pa tapos sa kanilang araw, marami pa silang meeting, at bukas sa Quezon City naman sila. So dire-diretso ito at parang hindi sila senior citizens. Ang gusto nilang iparating, kaya nila makipagsabayan kahit sa mga batang mga kandidato.
Thank you, Rambo. Live from Imus, Cavite. Thank you for dialing in. I know it's been a long day and you're probably going to have a long day tomorrow. Next up is Aikari, pinakamalayo, at least from here in Manila, who's covering Manny Pacquiao's launch in General Santos City. Aika, tell us about Pacman. That's his home turf. Parang kumbaga, everything started there. Tell us about what happened earlier today. Aika? Nakamute ka ata.
So, hello,
There
hi
you go.
Bea. Hi, I'm here in Gensan. And actually, kakatapos lang ng proclamation rally ni Senator Pacquiao, no? The day started with, actually, walang event dito noong umaga. So, nung pagdating namin dito sa may oval para tingnan ko anong nangyari sa setup ng proclamation rally ni Senator Pacquiao, merong mini rally ng mga volunteer para kay Vice President Leni Robredo. So, yun yung nangyari noong umaga. And actually, ang talagang nasa itinerary nila, initially, dapat merong visit sa Fishport, and then may caravan, and then yung proclamation rally. And then, they were supposed to go to Alabel, Sarangani, kasi ang gusto nila sana puntahan yung pinapagawang tour. Media tour siya ng pabahay ni Senator Pacquiao. Para naipakita ito, no, sa mga tao. Although dahil nga nangyagaling pa sila sa Cebu kahapon, kinakailangan pa nilang i-move yung kanilang
kailangan nilang i-move, no, yung schedule kasi nga nanggaling pa silang Cebu kahapon. Although parang ang masasabi ko lang dito sa ganitong biglang pabago-bago na schedule, dahil mismong oras ng Proclamation Rally ay naibahagi sa media na dapat alas 3, pero initially dapat alas 5, tapos biglang naging alas 3, tapos apparently alas 5 pala. So parang magkakaroon ka ng feel na medyo parang internally, parang medyo merong magulo dahil even the schedules na, di ba supposedly, o hindi naman supposedly, but at least nakasanayan, no, na yung mga kampo talaga na nagbibigay ng schedule beforehand. But ito, parang hindi ka sigurado until the very last minute. So parang ganon, meron siyang ganong sense na parang medyo magulo kung ano yung nangyayari doon. But dito, sa mismong proclamation rally ni Senator Pacquiao, meron nga nabanggit, no, na parang kulang siya sa punches yung proclamation rally niya dahil hindi nakadalo si Deputy Speaker Lito Atienza dahil nga natapilok daw siya, so hindi siya makakapunta. Tapos, ang kanyang mga senatorial balls na nandito ay si Raffy Tulfo and then si former former governor Lutgardo Barbo, no. At merong representative si Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, yung girlfriend niya na si Miss Bianca Manalo. So far, ang pinag-usapan naman ni Senator Manny Pacquiao sa kanyang proclamation rally speech, no, is yung talagang same na gusto niya na dapat daw paglaban yung korupsyon. Nagkwento siya kung paano siya nagsimula at bakit sa Jensen niya yung pinili niya. At ayon sa kanya, ang Jensen ang pinili niya dahil dito siya nagsimulang mangarap, no. So kaya ang gusto niya, yung kanyang pagiging yung pangarap niya na maging may angat yung buhay ng pamilya niya, ay dito rin sa Jensen mismo magsisimula ang kanyang pangarap para sa buong Pilipinas at pag-govern, no, dito sa ating bansa. So, yun, binabalik lang ni Senator Manny Pacquiao dun sa anti-corruption platform niya. Yes, Bea.
Thank you, Eka. Before I ask you a question, I want to thank Editor-at-Large Metas Vito. She had to leave earlier. But, Eka, ang ironic nga, no, kasi may 22-round agenda. Tama ba yung term ko? 22-round
Yes.
agenda. Si Senator Pacquiao, pero medyo kulang ng punch yung event kanina. Si Manny Pacquiao is very used to winning as a professional boxer, though he did lose his last professional fight. What's working so far? Ano yung medyo hindi nag-work for the candidate Pacquiao? Kasi parang numbers-wise, di ba? He isn't really doing the best per the last Pulse Asia survey.
Yung latest Pulse Asia survey, nasa 8% lang, no, yung number ni Senator Pacquiao. Actually, tayo sila ni Mayor Isko Moreno. So, dun sila sa 3rd and 4th place. Actually, yung kung titingnan mo, para sa mga tao, no, gusto nila si Senator Pacquiao dahil nga mabait daw si Senator Pacquiao, mapagbigay, willing palaging tumulong. So yun talaga yung nagre-resonate sa mga tao. Kaya lang, syempre, kapag even here sa Jensen, actually, we did some interviews yesterday and earlier this morning na sinasabi nila, mabait nga si Senator Pacquiao. But then, ang sinasabi nila, bakit hindi si Bongbong Marcos? So, merong ganong sentimiento na even here, dito sa, kung iisipin ay parang Pacquiao country, dahil nga sinasabi nila na kailangan nila ng pagbabago. Yan, Bea.
JC?
Yes, Aika, meron lang akong tanong, kasi isa sa mga criticisms or puna doon sa campaign is that merong magandang story na pwedeng i-offer si Manny Pacquiao, rags to riches, tapos success in boxing, pero parang hindi masyadong na-leverage in the past couple of months, and that led to the rather dismal numbers in the recent surveys. May ganong klaseng apprehension ba yung campaign, or paano umabot sa ganong punto na ang ganda ng kwento pero bakit hindi nag-translate into numbers?
Parang medyo mahirap sagutin yung tanong mo dyan, no, JC. Pero actually, kasi kung mapapansin mo din, si Senator Pacquiao kasi, yung isang war kasi, or isang battleground, hindi lang naman siya on the ground Meron din online. Kung makikita natin, merong pinublish recently yung Nielsen, and it was written by PCIJ na very minimal lang talaga yung ginastos ni Senator Pacquiao on ads, no? So, pwedeng isa din yun na hindi rin siya nagiging visible dun sa area na yon at sa social media. And napag-uusapan nga ito ng, dahil meron kaming nakausap nung habang nakikipagkwentuhan kanina on the campaign trail, sinasabi nga na hindi gumagastos si Senator Pacquiao sa ads, sa campaign ads, dahil nga, nung panahon na hindi pa kampanya, mas gusto daw niya na ipamagay na lang yung pera sa mga taong nangangailangan kaysa gumastos sa campaign ads. But then of course, if you think about it, hindi lang naman kasi ground yung talagang kailangan nilang pagtuunan ng pansin. Ngayong 2022, hindi lang naman siya pandemic elections. Pangalawa na rin siyang presidential na social media election. So yun din yung isa kailangan nilang pagtuunan ng pansin kung gusto nila talagang umakyat yung numbers nila.
Ay, gusto ko mag-zoom out ng konti at yung tanong na to siguro kasama na rin si JC dito sa sasagot, no? So far, kasi Aika, aside from being the Pacquiao reporter, she covers the budget and the economy for Rappler. Sa mga kandidato so far, sa mga kandidato and whatever they've chosen to announce na or articulate properly, like whose economic strategy or proposal has stood out, or may mga proposals ba na parang kahit kayo hindi nyo lubos maintindihan kung ano ang gusto i-achieve ng mga kandidatong to?
Well, syempre, si Senator Pacquiao yung aking kino-cover, no? And I think I've already mentioned this before in some of the stories I've tweeted and sa ibang mga napag-uusapan din natin, na si Senator Pacquiao, meron siyang binabanggit palagi yung tungkol sa non-tax revenue income. Historically, mababa ito. So, parang minsan mapapatanong ka, ano ba talaga yung gusto niyang gawin dun sa non-tax revenue income, no? So, ito yung basically yung mga sources, ito yung pinagkukuhaan, paano mo popondahan yung budget mo, no, sa kada taon. And si Senator Pacquiao actually wants to fund a lot of projects, no, and programs. Marami siyang freebies na gustong gawin. So, kung gusto niyang bawasan yung gusto niya ng tax cuts, gusto din niya ng mas mataas na share ng non-tax revenue income. Yung question is, how is he going to do it, no? So, yun yung isa sa mga napapansin ko talaga. Although for other candidates, I've yet to see, because of course, mas napapansin ko si Senator Pacquiao. I think maybe JC might want to chime in.
Yes,
and that's where I insert and say na, JC, wait lang. Mamaya natin pag-usapan yan when other analysts join us. Thank you, Aika Ray. She's live from General Santos City. It's been a long day for each and every one of us. Thank you for joining us, Aika. Now, at this point in our coverage, Rappler's regional head in Verona and Rappler columnist and editorial consultant John Neri will be joining us. Of course, andito pa si JC Punong Bayan at si Sofia Toma Cruz. Binitin natin ng konti si JC kanina sa pagsagot niya tungkol sa economic plans ng mga kandidato natin. So, ladies and gentlemen, anong oras na? It's 9:11. Been a long day. What do you think? What stood out from the launches today? John, you want to start?
I use this concept a lot, but I think it really applies to the start of the official campaign period. Proclamation rallies are really political theater. It's more spectacle than substance. Yeah. It's more presentation than policy discussion. And it was very interesting. I found it very interesting to compare and contrast the different proclamation rallies. You might say that there's an element of performance art, especially, for instance, in the case of a charismatic Isko Moreno, who I would describe as someone who speaks like a keynote or a motivational speaker in a forum. But there was also a different kind of performance art. Vice President Leni Robredo, we might describe her performance as that of a practiced or seasoned moderator or facilitator. So very different speaking styles. I must even note that Bongbong Marcos was much more coherent than usual. And it speaks to the performance art part of it. But there's also an element of morality play. Everyone is setting their personal stories. And it's basically triumph of good over evil, that sort of thing. Of course, we can distinguish one narrative from the other, but that would be my main impression. First of all, that for better or for worse, this is Philippine politics. We've reached the point where our proclamation rallies are just political theater.
kumbaga dyan, ito yung lead nila sa storya nila. Eh, no? So, kailangan, wala munang, hindi, pero yung lead, mali pala yung metaphor ko kasi kung lead, kailangan may who, what, where, may basics ka man lang. Pero ito style, yung pinaka-importante sa pag-launch mo ng kampanya. Inday, what stood out for you dito sa mga launch ng mga kandidato natin?
Well, I was actually more interested in watching the supporters and how they navigated today, no? So I'm very noticeably um napaka-contrasting nung behavior ng Lenny supporters and Marcos supporters. Okay. Yung Marcos supporters, I was looking through the pages today and nakita ko tutok na tutok kay Marcos Jr. They were all focused on the arena. There was hardly anything going on in their groups. No? In contrast, the Lenny supporters were all about doing their initiatives to support, to amplify in communities yung kanilang um, support for Lenny and for amplifying her message. Okay, I'm not sure which worked very well. Time will tell. In terms of social media, obviously we've seen those huge numbers in views and in shares of the Marcos Duterte Bulacan event today, much higher than the Robredo shares. Okay, and yet I think that the actions of the Robredo followers on the ground, makikita mo ibang-iba from yung dating ambiance na, oh, the SUVs and the cars. These were people on the ground, um, ordinary people, nagkakampanya na sila sa ground, no? In the Visayas, especially also in Mindanao, as Sir said. And it was very interesting that in Cebu, for example, one of the speakers was a former Duterte supporter. You know, in Bacolod, actually, they've had a few Duterte supporters. And there were some Robredo supporters who were going against their principals in local campaigns. And so it's going to be very interesting. I think Marcos may not be as solid as he wants to be, and that there's room, whether it's Lenny or Kiko, or no, whether it's Lenny or Isko, to eat up some of his gains there.
Thanks, Inday. JC, sorry, binitin kita kanina, pero balik tayo sa'yo. Among
No
the
problem.
candidates, pero syempre with a caveat na halos wala talagang na-discuss na mga platform talaga today because as John pointed out kanina, kick-offs are really about the pageantry, if you will, of the Philippine elections. Pero among the candidates so far, of course, limited by kung sino na ang naglatag ng maayos na economic plans nila. Are there any that stand out and are there any na parang talagang kahit ikaw hindi mo maintindihan kung ano bang gusto nila?
Yes, well, Bea, at this point, nagkakaroon ng convergence do sa economic platforms ng top presidential bets. For example, all of them are saying that we need to revitalize the economy, push for economic recovery, improve the pandemic response, push aid for MSMEs and the workers, yung food security, agriculture, and then merong mga narrative, for example, yung aversion to importation, na lagi nababanggit yung importation ng galunggong. At pero in fact, when you look at it, parang yung underlying problems, for example, yung overfishing in our waters ay hindi nababanggit, pero may ganung klaseng narratives that are emerging. And then of course, meron yung mga mas niche na mga policy proposals like budget reform from Panfilo Lacson and then yung wealth tax from Macaliodi. Pero I think kailangan na nating makita yung mga economic plans Parang beyond yung spectacle na nababanggit dito sa campaign kick-offs, kailangan na talaga natin mag-drill down do sa mga detalye. The devil is always in the details. Si VP Lenny has already provided a comprehensive plan for economic recovery, but as I mentioned earlier, yung challenge is how to reach out to or how to bring this down to the level na maintindihan ng pinakamaraming tao, kasi yun nga yun parang yun yung challenge do sa campaign. Si Isko, meron ang emerging narrative sa kanya is continuity. Yung build ni Duterte, yung drug war, and if not continuing those policies, he wants to improve on those. Pero whether or not that kind of narrative of continuity will work in his favor, that remains to be seen. Pero I like yung mga hints niya about technology, digitalization, open data. That's quite refreshing to hear from Isko. When it comes to Calyodi, of course, nandiyan yung mga progressive policies such as yung wealth tax, yung improving workers' welfare. That really plays dun sa base niya dun sa more left ng political spectrum natin. Si Pacquiao, meron yung 22-round agenda na of course hindi natin ma-expect na explain niya today. Pero it would be nice to hear more from him about that. Pero ayun parang hindi pa rin siya klaro doon, for example, doon sa issue pa lang nung non-tax revenue sources, parang siya mismo nalilito pa so tingnan natin kung mag-improve yung narrative niya. Si Lacson, anti-corruption, budget reform, pero again, we don't know if that works. Hindi naman yun usually popular na talking point. And then yung Marcos, walang plano, pero it really banks on nostalgia doon sa una nating punto kanina, and I think that's very strong, pero kailangan nating mapiga pa siya pagdating doon sa mga detalye.
Hopefully, JC, by the time the first presidential debates roll out, medyo mas malinaw na, no, yung mga economic plans ng mga kandidato natin. Sophia, you've been covering the pandemic response, pandemic plans of the Duterte administration. How does it feel to see something like a campaign kickoff where necessarily you have crowds, right? No matter kung gaano ka pa strict in controlling, may crowd pa rin yan. How does it feel to see this unfold? What are your thoughts on seeing parang these in effect are mass gatherings during a pandemic?
Well, I think John raised an important point a while ago about we don't talk about policy issues so much during proclamation rallies. It's really just theater. But I think there are some things we can take away regardless. From all the theatrics that we saw today, and we saw it in how the candidates mounted their proclamation rally. So, that also sends a message about what their visions or how they view the virus. So, for example, off the top of my head, one stark difference I saw is how Marcos and Sara Duterte mounted an indoor proclamation rally, which gathered around 25,000 people in the middle of a pandemic. Granted, the capacity of the Philippine Arena was 50,000 people, and it was alert level 2. So you can say you can mention all these things about following protocols, but you see, for example, how other candidates took extra steps to ensure the safety of their supporters. If I'm not mistaken, all the other candidates mounted their proclamation rallies outdoor. They also tried to keep the crowds to a minimum. You mentioned earlier that Mayor Isko Moreno had invites, which is something that we don't hear about when it comes to elections, because the bigger the better, right? But then you also saw how difficult it would be for candidates to really enforce those pandemic restrictions that the Comelec has in place, like what Mara said. But we are seeing right now, or like this early on, how candidates are viewing the pandemic, and I think it's important to lay out just how drastic the pandemic has changed. I mean, how big of a change the pandemic has had on an election season. We're talking about if we're talking about what's at stake come election, come May. The pandemic has so very clearly made the case for what good governance can mean to people's lives. If you have good leadership, competent leadership, it instills trust. For instance, and like I mentioned earlier, Rabia, just recently they found that that's the one factor that really made a difference in terms of how well a country fared in terms of weathering COVID-19. It's the trust that they had in the government. It's the trust that they had in each other, which is also fostered by really the kind of leadership that you have up top. And more than anything, I think the pandemic has changed the election landscape in the sense that Filipinos are really going to choose how bad or how much better the pandemic will get in the coming months and years. And you know, I if we're talking about things like trust and pandemic plans, I am curious to see how, for example, candidates will foster trust in a very crowded field. I remember John mentioning earlier, back in our first few in the running episodes, how like the president might win by a plurality vote come this election. So fostering that public trust, and really, I think even if candidates don't go into like the nitty gritty details during their campaign sorties and everything, we, of course, there are a lot of things to take away from the way that they mount those campaigns. Like I mentioned, how they the foremost being how they care and how they show their regard for the safety of their own supporters.
Thanks, Sophia. John, because it's a presidential, because there's the presidency is at stake, no? Parang minsan hindi napapansin yung sectoral candidates. But because perhaps you and me, we are political dorks, napapansin natin yung, what I like about the kickoffs is it's when you see the shared candidates, kumbaga picking kung saan ba talaga sila magpapakita, saan sila papanig. First, siguro yung una kong tanong ay, ano ba tong shared candidates na to? Bakit ba tayo may shared candidates sa elections natin dito sa Pilipinas?
I'm glad you raised that because that's really another striking thing about today's proclamation rallies. We've had common candidates before, shared candidates, but I think this year we can see it in on full display. By my count, I think there are about 9 politicians, all of them national figures, either incumbent or former senators, one former vice president, and one former public works secretary, who are shared by different slates. Uh, that is a concession to political reality, because the reality is our party system is very weak. So, in fact, um, political dynasties, and many of these come from political dynasties, are the equivalent of political parties. The brand of an Escudero or a Lauren Legarda or a Joel Villanueva or a Jojo Binay um, is actually higher than the value of, let's say, a PDP Laban or an Action Democratico. So it's very sad that we've reached this point. But on the other hand, it's also a question of political viability. So a presidential candidate who is able to invite big names uh, is sending very strong and expensive signals to the competition that he or she is capable of attracting big names like Gordon, who, for instance, surprisingly showed up in Naga. So Gordon is one of 5 common candidates, guest candidates, they're called, from an internal perspective, of the Robredo Pangilinan slate. And he was the only one who showed up in Naga of the 5 guest candidates. One of the other guest candidates, Zubiri, showed up in Marcos's proclamation rally, and then had a video and sent his wife to represent him in the Lacson Soto proclamation rally. Some of this is it's the political class doing favors for one another. If you look at the 9 here, most of them are senators. Many of them revolve around the so-called former macho bloc in the Senate. You have Lauren, you have Tito Soto, you have JB Estrada, JB Ejercito. So this is the political class doing favors for one another. But it's also important to realize that 3 slates, Lenny's, Pings, and Manny's, have 5 common candidates. Unusual. Um, I don't know what that would mean. I think that right now, for instance, Zubiri made the decision to show up personally at Marcos's proclamation rally because that's where the votes are at this point in time. It's very possible that if the surveys show a go in a different direction. He might be hosting proclamation rallies of his own for Robredo or Lacson or Manny Pacquiao. He's part of four slates,
Yeah.
back in his home province of Bukidnon. So it's very interesting. It can be quite confusing, but really it's an indictment of Philippine political reality that politicians, other politicians, need to share common candidates.
Yeah. On that note, also interesting yung mga shared guest candidates who didn't show up in any kickoff. Top of mind, former Senator Honasan, his wife attended the Marcos Jr. and Sara Duterte's kickoff. Pero I believe if I remember correctly, he already committed to a kickoff event or an event with Victory, if I heard that right. And if I'm not mistaken, former Vice President Jojo Marbinay naman went around Batangas earlier pero hindi rin siya sumama sa mga kick-off ng vice presidential at presidential candidates, even though he is a shared resource, shared candidate of several slates. John, gusto ko rin itanong, itong kay Sara Duterte, baka biased ako kasi I cover Sara Duterte in 2022, but Saturday, she announced that she was supporting 3 candidates outside of the Uniteam slate. Kanina, nung nag-speech siya, nag-announce siya ng 4 more names. So she has 7 candidates na wala sa Uniteam slate, pero kumbaga personal slate niya. Have we heard that happen before? That you have, a tandem, tas ironically, unity pa yung battle cry nila kumbaga, but you have a vice president endorsing a separate slate from the tandem slate.
No, I have never come across this phenomenon, and I've certainly never come across a phenomenon of a unity tandem with separate Senate recommendations. So Sara, for instance, has 4 common candidates: Lauren Legarda, Chis Escudero, Jinggoy Estrada, and Mark Villar, shared with other slates. I find that very interesting. I'm really curious to know, what I would pay to be a fly on the wall in the Marcos campaign headquarters. I guess even Bongo Marcos might be wondering what is this about. I really don't right now. I really don't know what to make of it, except that Sara is very much her own woman, I guess.
Right, and 2 of those, if I'm not mistaken, 2 of those candidates, but I may have lost count. 2 of them are PDP Laban candidates, Sal Panialo and Robin Padilla. So wala sila sa Uniteam slate. So kumbaga at this point, plus Uniteam, Sara's endorsing more than 12 senators. But to add to that, hindi rin yan bago sa Dutertes. Kasi ganun din sila nung 2019, lagpas 12 yung in-endorse ni Sara under HNP sa Davao Region. And the Dutertes themselves sa Davao City, parang naging habit din nila yun na kumbaga sa local elections, sa councilors, lumalagpas sila sa limit ng kung ilan lang yung nahahalal na councilors, but they just endorse the candidates, they get the support of the Dutertes. Pero kumbaga, ikaw na bahala, make sure that you win the elections and you secure that council seat.
I'm glad you brought it up, Bea, because that is true. That is very characteristic of the Duterte brand of politics. So I guess Sara is very much her father's daughter. This is a very Darwinian approach to politics. They really believe in this survival of the fittest. So they support, in 2019, they supported 13 senatorial candidates for 12 seats. Parang bahala na kayo. Parang ganon, no? Very Darwinian. It's fascinating, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how this will all unfold. Feeling ko in the coming weeks, going back to the shared and then the shared/guest candidates, parang maglalaglagan na kumbaga. Kasi some campaigns will eventually kumbaga ask the candidate, please pick, because you can't endorse 4 presidents, for example. So kumbaga ito nga yung lead pa lang to sa napakahabang istorya ng 2022 elections. 90 days pa lang. And yet, napakahaba na ng araw na to. I want to thank John and I want to thank Inday, who's still on the line, for joining us. Kahit na medyo late na tayo natapos, gusto ko ring pasalamatan si Marites Vitog, si JC, si Sofia, for staying with me through this very long coverage of the kickoff of the 2022 elections. At kayo, yung mga nanonood pa rin hanggang ngayon, siguro kung may mga nanonood ba from the start to the finish, salamat for watching and sticking with us. Again, This has been Bea Kupin. This brings to a close this special edition of In the Running, which highlights the start of the candidates' campaigns. Tune in to Rappler's special coverage of the 2022 elections. Go to PH Vote. Mag-aral kayo, magbasa kayo ng Rappler, magbasa kayo ng iba pang mga news sites kasi sisikapin din namin na i-challenge yung mga candidates para come May 9, we make a very good decision when we go to the polls. This has been Bea Kupin. You have been watching Rappler. Thank you for joining us. Good night.